I stood frozen in the doorway of my own home. My breath caught somewhere between my lungs and my throat as I heard my husband Victor sobbing into the phone. But it was not the crying that paralyzed me. It was his words, crystal clear, slicing through the air like shattered glass. He was talking to his father, Judge Elias Thorne, a man who had built his entire career on the pillars of honor and integrity, and what I heard next would detonate my entire world. Victor's voice cracked as he said, "I got Serena pregnant. She's 7 months along. Eleanor doesn't know anything." There was a heavy pause. Then the judge's voice boomed through the speaker, furious and disappointed. "You've disgraced this family's name. Confess to Eleanor immediately." But Victor did not confess. Instead, he broke down further, his voice trembling with self-pity rather than remorse. "I can't do that, Dad. She's carrying my child. And Eleanor can't give me children." The world tilted on its axis. My vision blurred. My hand, still gripping my car keys, began to shake violently. I had come home early to grab an important contract for a meeting, and instead, I had stumbled into the wreckage of my marriage. 7 months pregnant. Not a mistake. Not a one-night stand, a relationship, a planned betrayal. And he had reduced me, his wife of 7 years, to nothing more than an empty vessel who failed him because I could not carry his child. The pain was instant and suffocating, but it was quickly consumed by something colder, sharper, more dangerous. Rage. Pure, calculated rage. I did not storm into the room. I did not scream. I did not collapse in tears. Instead, I slowly backed away from the door, my heels silent on the hardwood floor, and I walked out of that house as quietly as I had entered. My hands were trembling so violently I could barely grip the steering wheel, but I managed to drive. I drove to Maple and Steam, the little coffee shop that had been my refuge during the loneliest months of our marriage, when Victor claimed he was working late. I ordered a black coffee I would not drink, opened my laptop, and began typing with the precision of a seasoned executive. I created a folder and named it Unveiling Deception Father's Day. I searched for private investigators in Detroit, divorce attorneys in Michigan, and apartments for rent in Midtown Towers. And as I clicked through listings and law firm websites, something shifted inside me. The pain was still there, gnawing at my ribs, but it no longer controlled me. This was no longer about love or marriage. This was war, and I intended to win. But before I tell you how I dismantled his lies piece by piece, before I show you how I turned his betrayal into his reckoning, I need you to do something for me. If this story resonates with you, if you have ever felt invisible in your own life, if you have ever been made to feel less than because you could not meet someone else's expectations, then hit that like button. Subscribe to this channel because I am going to share every detail of how I took back my power. And leave a comment below telling me, have you ever had to choose between staying silent and reclaiming your truth? Because your voice matters. Now let me take you back to the beginning, to the moment my perfectly curated life began to crack. My name is Eleanor Vance. I am 35 years old, and if you had asked me 3 months ago to describe my life, I would have used words like successful, stable, comfortable. I am the senior sales director for Lexus Detroit, a position I earned through 15 years of relentless dedication and a talent for reading people. I can walk into a room and within minutes know exactly what someone needs, what they fear, what will make them say yes. It is a skill that has served me well in my career. It is also a skill that somehow failed me completely in my own marriage. Victor Sterling and I met 8 years ago at a corporate fundraiser for children's literacy. The event was held at the Detroit Institute of Arts, one of those elegant affairs where everyone wore their success like expensive cologne. I was there representing Lexus Networking with potential high-value clients. Victor was there with his father, Judge Elias Thorne, a man whose reputation in Michigan legal circles was legendary. Victor approached me at the champagne bar, and I remember thinking he looked like someone who had never been told no. He was tall, impeccably dressed in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than my monthly rent, and he had this way of looking at you that made you feel like you were the only person in the room. We talked for 2 hours. He told me about his vision for Sterling Holdings, the real estate development company his father had built from nothing. He spoke about legacy, about building something that would outlast us, about creating a family that would carry on that legacy. I was captivated. We married a year later at the Detroit Yacht Club. It was the kind of wedding you see in magazines. 300 guests, a 12-piece orchestra, a cake that was taller than I was. My mother cried during the ceremony, and when she hugged me afterward, she whispered, "You did it, honey. You found someone who will take care of you." At the time, I thought she was right. I thought I had found my person, my partner, the man I would build a life with. I was 27 years old, and I believed in fairy tales. The first 2 years were good, better than good. We traveled to Italy for our honeymoon, spent 3 weeks driving through Tuscany, drinking wine in tiny hill towns, making love in hotel rooms with windows that overlooked vineyards. We bought the house in Bloomfield Hills, a 2-story colonial with a wraparound porch and enough land for the children we planned to have. We talked about those children constantly. Victor wanted 3, maybe 4. He had names picked out. Benjamin for a boy after his grandfather. Charlotte for a girl after mine. We painted what would be the nursery a soft yellow neutral weighting. We bought a golden retriever puppy we named Cooper, joking that he was practice for the real thing. But then the months turned into a year, and I was not pregnant. At first it did not worry me. I was young, healthy, there was time. But Victor began to ask questions. Are you tracking your cycle? Are you taking your vitamins? Maybe we should see a doctor. So we did. The first doctor told us to relax, that stress could be a factor, that many couples took time. 6 months later, we saw another doctor, then another. I underwent test after test, blood work, ultrasounds, procedures with names I could barely pronounce, and every time the results came back the same. Unexplained infertility. Everything looked normal. My hormones were fine. My ovaries were fine. There was no medical reason I should not be able to conceive. But I could not. That phrase, unexplained infertility, became the defining characteristic of my existence. It was the first thing I thought about when I woke up in the morning and the last thing I thought about before I fell asleep. It was the elephant in the room at every family gathering when someone asked when we were going to start a family. It was the knife that twisted in my gut every time I saw a pregnancy announcement on social media. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, it became the thing that changed everything between Victor and me. He stopped touching me the way he used to. Our conversations became transactional. Did you pick up my dry cleaning? Do we have plans this weekend? What time is your meeting tomorrow? The intimacy drained out of our marriage like water from a cracked vessel, and I was so consumed by my own sense of failure that I did not notice until it was too late. I told myself it was temporary. I told myself that once we figured out the fertility issue, things would go back to normal. I threw myself into my work. I took on bigger accounts, longer hours, more responsibility. If I could not give Victor a child, then I would give him everything else. I would be the perfect wife, the supportive partner, the woman who never complained, never demanded, never made waves. Looking back now, I realize that was when I started to disappear. Not all at once, but gradually, like a photograph left too long in the sun. I stopped voicing my opinions when they differed from Victor's. I stopped making plans with my friends because he preferred I be available when he was home. I stopped wearing bright colors because he once mentioned he preferred me in neutrals. I became smaller and quieter and more accommodating, and I thought I was being a good wife. I thought I was holding my marriage together. What I was actually doing was erasing myself. The distance between us grew. Victor started working late more often. Weekend business trips became routine. He would leave on Friday morning and return Sunday night exhausted and distant. When I asked about his trips, he would give vague answers: client meetings in Chicago, a conference in Columbus, investors in Indianapolis. I believed him because I wanted to believe him, because the alternative was too painful to consider, because I had invested 7 years of my life into this marriage, and I was not ready to admit that I was watching it die. There were signs, small things that I explained away or ignored. He changed his phone password and said it was for security reasons at work. He started going to the gym at odd hours, coming home showered and smelling of cologne. He bought new clothes, sharper suits, more expensive ties. When I complimented him, he shrugged and said he needed to look the part for potential investors. I wanted to believe him so badly that I made myself blind. 3 months ago, everything changed. It was a Tuesday in early March, one of those gray Michigan days where the sky is the same color as the slush on the ground. I had a meeting scheduled with Gregory Chin, a CEO looking to purchase a fleet of vehicles for his executive team. It was a big account, potentially 6 figures, and I had spent weeks preparing. The meeting was at 3. I left the office at 2:30, and as I was driving, I realized I had left the signed contract on the kitchen table at home. I texted Victor, heading home quick to grab contract, be there in 10. He did not respond, which was not unusual. He often had his phone on silent during meetings. When I pulled into the driveway, his BMW was there. I felt a flutter of happiness. It was rare for us to be home at the same time during the workday. Maybe we could have lunch together. Maybe we could really talk for the first time in months. I unlocked the front door and stepped inside. The house was quiet except for a sound coming from Victor's study. At first, I thought he was on a business call, but as I moved closer, I realized he was crying. Not just crying, sobbing. Deep, wrenching sobs that sounded like they were tearing him apart. I should have announced myself. I should have knocked on the door and asked if he was okay. But something stopped me. Maybe it was intuition. Maybe it was the months of accumulated doubt finally demanding acknowledgement. I stood in the hallway, my back against the wall, and I listened. Victor was on the phone. I could hear the other voice tinny through the speaker. It was his father, Judge Thorne, and what I heard in the next 60 seconds shattered every illusion I had been clinging to. Victor's voice, broken and desperate, said, "I got Serena pregnant. She's 7 months along. Eleanor doesn't know anything." There was a pause. Then Judge Thorne's voice, furious and cold. "You've disgraced this family's name. You need to confess to Eleanor immediately and fix this mess." But Victor did not agree. Instead, he said something that stopped my heart. "I can't do that, Dad. She's carrying my child. And Eleanor can't give me children. This was my solution. This was how I was going to have the family I wanted." I do not remember walking back to the front door. I do not remember getting in my car or driving away. The next thing I remember clearly is sitting in the parking lot of Maple and Steam, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles had turned white. I looked down and saw that I was shaking, my entire body vibrating with a feeling I could not name. It was not just betrayal. It was not just pain. It was the sudden, horrifying realization that the man I had loved, the man I had built my life around, had never really seen me as a partner. I was a project, a problem to be solved. And when I could not solve myself, he had simply found someone else. I walked into Maple and Steam on legs that did not feel like my own. The barista, a young woman with purple hair and kind eyes, asked what I wanted. I heard myself say, "Black coffee. Large." I sat at a table in the corner, the same table I had sat at countless times before, when I needed to escape the emptiness of my own home. I opened my laptop. My hands were still shaking, but my mind had gone very, very quiet. The chaos of emotion had crystallized into something clear and cold. I opened a new document and titled it Unveiling Deception Father's Day Project. And then I began to plan. I started by searching for divorce attorneys in Michigan. I read reviews, looked at success rates, made notes about who specialized in high-asset divorces. Then I searched for private investigators. I needed someone discreet, someone who could gather evidence without tipping off Victor. I found several options and bookmarked them. Next, I searched for apartments in Midtown Towers, the luxury building directly across from Victor's office. If he had set up Serena there, I needed to know everything about it. As I typed and clicked and researched, something remarkable happened. The pain began to recede, replaced by a sense of purpose I had not felt in years. This was not about saving my marriage anymore. This was about reclaiming my life. This was about making sure that when I walked away from Victor, I did so on my terms with my head held high and the truth on my side. I stayed at Maple and Steam for 3 hours. I missed my meeting with Gregory Chin, texting him an apology and rescheduling for later in the week. By the time I closed my laptop, I had a plan. Step 1, gather evidence. Step 2, secure my assets. Step 3, find the right moment to reveal everything. And Step 4, walk away without looking back. I drove home as the sun was setting, the sky streaked with pink and orange. Victor's car was gone, There was a note on the kitchen table. Had to fly to Cincinnati for emergency meeting. Back Thursday. Love you. I stared at the words, love you, and felt absolutely nothing. That night, I could not sleep. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing. 7 months pregnant. That meant this had been going on for at least 10 months, maybe longer. 10 months of lies. 10 months of him coming home and kissing me on the forehead and asking about my day while he was building an entirely separate life with someone else. The scope of the deception was staggering. And yet, as the hours passed and the darkness outside my window slowly gave way to dawn, I felt something unexpected. Relief. Because now I knew. The doubt and the confusion and the feeling that something was wrong that had been eating away at me for months was validated. I was not crazy. I was not paranoid. I had been lied to systematically and deliberately. And now that I knew the truth, I could do something about it. The next morning, Wednesday, I called in sick to work. I told my assistant I had a migraine and needed the day off. It was the first sick day I had taken in 3 years. Then I went into Victor's study. His laptop was sitting on his desk closed, but not locked away. Victor had always been careless about security at home. He trusted me. Or, more accurately, he assumed I was too focused on my own failures to pay attention to his activities. I opened the laptop. The password screen appeared and my heart sank. But then I remembered. 2 years ago, when Victor had been complaining about forgetting passwords, I had suggested he use a password manager. He had set it up and I had been there when he created the master password. It was Benjamin 1997, a combination of his planned son's name and the year he graduated from college. I typed it in. The computer unlocked. I spent the next 4 hours going through everything. Emails, bank statements, credit card records. What I found was methodical, calculated, infuriating. There were email threads with Serena going back 14 months. The early messages were flirtatious but professional. Then they became personal. Then they became explicit. I read one from 8 months ago where Victor told Serena he loved her, that he was going to leave me as soon as he figured out how to do it without losing half his assets. I read another from 6 months ago where Serena told him she was pregnant, and Victor responded with joy, calling it the best news of his life. But the emails were just the beginning. The financial records were worse. Victor had opened a separate credit card, one I had never known about, linked to the company account at Sterling Holdings. Over the past year, he had charged more than $138,000 to this card. I went through the statements line by line. Monthly rent for an apartment at Midtown Towers, $5,000 a month. Furniture from Restoration Hardware, jewelry from Tiffany, dinners at expensive restaurants I had never been to, prenatal care at a private obstetrics clinic, a weekend trip to Mackinac Island. Every charge was a dagger. Every line item was proof that while I had been agonizing over our infertility, tormenting myself with the belief that I was failing him, he had been building a parallel life where I did not exist. I printed everything, every email, every statement, every receipt. I organized them chronologically in a 3-ring binder. As I worked, I felt oddly detached, like I was preparing a presentation for a client, rather than documenting the destruction of my marriage. Maybe that was the only way I could do it, by treating it as a project, by removing the emotion and focusing on the facts. When I finished, I had a binder 3 inches thick. I labeled it Evidence Financial Misconduct and Infidelity. I hid it in the back of my closet behind a box of winter clothes Victor never touched. By the time I was done, it was late afternoon. I was exhausted but wired my mind racing with everything I had learned. I needed to talk to someone. Not a friend, not yet. I was not ready to say the words out loud, but I needed professional help. I called the first private investigator on my list, a man named Marcus Riley. His website described him as a former insurance fraud investigator who specialized in discrete domestic cases. I left a message asking him to call me back. He returned my call within an hour. His voice was gravelly and direct. "You called about a case. Tell me what you need." I took a deep breath. "My husband is having an affair. She's pregnant. I need to know everything. Where she lives. When this started. If she knows he's married. Can you do that?" There was a pause. "Yeah, I can do that. But I need to know, are you planning to use this in a divorce? I hesitated. Yes. Then you need to be careful about how the information is gathered. Everything has to be above board. Legal. I nodded even though he could not see me. That's exactly what I want. No shortcuts. Just the truth. We agreed to meet the next day at a diner on the outskirts of the city, far enough from Bloomfield Hills that I would not run into anyone I knew. Thursday morning, I told my assistant I had an off-site meeting and drove to the diner. Mac Riley looked exactly like I had imagined. Mid-50s gray hair cut short wearing jeans and a leather jacket. He ordered coffee and got straight to business. Give me everything you know. I handed him a folder with copies of the emails and financial records I had found. I also gave him a photo of Victor and the address of Sterling Holdings. Mac flipped through the documents, his expression unreadable. This is good work. You've already done half my job. I allowed myself a small, bitter smile. I'm good at research. He looked up at me. What's your goal here? Do you want to reconcile or do you want out? I did not hesitate. I want out, and I want him to know that I know everything. Mac nodded slowly. Okay, that I can work with. We discussed logistics. Mac would conduct surveillance, follow Victor, document his movements, and gather information on Serena Hayes. I gave him a retainer of $4,000 in cash money I had quietly withdrawn from my personal account over the past month. Mac promised to have a preliminary report within a week. As I drove home, I felt something I had not felt in a long time. Control. For 7 years, I had been reactive, responding to Victor's moods, his needs, his disappointments. I had shaped my life around making him happy, and it had cost me everything. But now, I was taking action. I was no longer a passive participant in my own story. I was directing it. Victor came home Thursday night just as he had said he would. He walked in carrying his overnight bag and a bouquet of tulips, my favorite flower. Hey, babe. Missed you. He kissed me on the cheek, handed me the flowers, and asked what was for dinner. I looked at him and wondered how he could be so calm, so normal when he was living a double life. How do you do it, I thought. How do you look me in the eye and lie so easily? But I did not ask these questions out loud. Instead, I smiled and said I was thinking of ordering Thai. Does that work? He nodded, already scrolling through his phone. Sounds great. I'm going to take a quick shower. He disappeared upstairs, and I stood there holding the tulips, thinking about how much I hated them now. Over the next 2 weeks, I lived in 2 realities. In one, I was Eleanor Vance's devoted wife, successful sales director woman trying to hold her life together. I went to work. I closed deals. I smiled at cocktail parties. I slept next to Victor every night, careful not to touch him, careful not to let on that anything had changed. In the other reality, I was a woman on a mission. I checked in with Mac daily. I documented every time Victor came home late, every unexplained charge on the credit card, every lie he told about where he had been. I researched Michigan divorce law, learning about equitable distribution and marital assets. I opened a separate bank account at a different bank and began quietly transferring money into it, building a safety net. Mac's first report came a week after we met. It was thorough and devastating. Serena Hayes was 23 years old, originally from Grand Rapids. She had started as an intern at Sterling Holdings 18 months ago and had been promoted to executive assistant to the CEO, Victor, 8 months ago. Mac had followed her for 3 days. She lived in apartment 2407 at Midtown Towers. Victor visited her every Tuesday and Thursday evening, staying for 2 to 3 hours. Mac had photos. Victor and Serena walking hand in hand into the building. Victor kissing her on the balcony. Serena, clearly pregnant, smiling up at him like he was the center of her universe. The photos made me nauseous, but I forced myself to look at each one. This was the evidence I needed. This was the truth, undeniable and documented. But Mac had also included something I had not expected. He had run a background check on Serena. She had no criminal record. She was by all accounts a normal young woman. She had posted on social media about being in love, about starting a new chapter, about building a future. In one post from 3 months ago, she had written, "Sometimes the best things come from the most unexpected places. I never thought I'd find someone who truly sees me, but I did. And I can't wait to spend my life with him." Mac had added a note at the bottom of the report. Based on her social media and the few conversations I've been able to overhear, I don't think she knows he's married. He's told her he's separated and waiting for the divorce to finalize. That note changed something for me. Up until that point, I had imagined Serena as a villain, a homewrecker who had deliberately seduced my husband. But the truth was more complicated. She was a victim too. Victor had lied to her just as he had lied to me. He had constructed a fantasy where he was the hero escaping a loveless marriage to build a new life with a woman who adored him. And both of us had believed him because we wanted to, because he was charming and convincing and so very, very good at telling people what they wanted to hear. I added Mac's report to my growing file. And then I did something that felt both impulsive and necessary. I drove to Midtown Towers. It was a Saturday afternoon. Victor was supposedly playing golf with clients. I parked across the street and waited. At 2:15, Serena emerged from the building. She was wearing a yellow sundress that stretched over her pregnant belly, her long, dark hair pulled back in a ponytail. She looked happy, carefree. She walked to a nearby cafe and sat at an outdoor table ordering something and pulling out her phone. I watched her for 20 minutes. At one point, she laughed at something on her screen, a genuine, unguarded laugh. I thought about walking over to her. I thought about sitting down and saying, "We need to talk about Victor." But I did not. Not yet. I was not ready to confront her. I was still gathering pieces, still building my case. So instead, I took photos, time-stamped, geotagged. Evidence that she was real, that this was happening, that I had not imagined the entire thing. As I drove away, I felt a strange mix of emotions. Anger at Victor for putting both of us in this position. Pity for Serena, who had no idea what was coming. And beneath it all, a growing sense of resolve. I was going to end this, but I was going to do it right. I was going to make sure that when the truth came out, there would be no ambiguity, no room for Victor to spin the narrative in his favor. Everyone would know exactly who he was and what he had done. The third week of my investigation brought an unexpected twist. I received a text from James Caldwell Victor's best friend and the best man at our wedding. James and I had always had a cordial relationship, but we were not close. The text was brief. "Eleanor, we need to talk. It's about Victor." Don't tell him I reached out. My heart started racing. I texted back immediately, when and where he suggested meeting at Maple and Steam the next day. I agreed. James was already there when I arrived. He looked uncomfortable, his hands wrapped around a coffee cup he had not touched. He stood when he saw me and we exchanged an awkward hug. "Thanks for meeting me." I nodded and sat down across from him. "What's this about?" James took a deep breath. "Look, this is hard for me. Victor's my best friend. We've known each other since college. But I can't keep this to myself anymore." I leaned forward. "Tell me." He looked down at his coffee. "Last month I threw a birthday party at my house. Victor got really drunk, like falling down drunk, and he started talking. I tried to get him to stop, but he wouldn't. He said that you couldn't have kids, that it was a problem for him. And then he said something that's been eating at me ever since." I felt my chest tighten. What did he say? James met my eyes, and I saw genuine guilt there. He said, "Eleanor can't give me children, so I let Serena get pregnant for both of us." Like it was some kind of solution. Like he was doing you a favor. I sat back, the words hitting me like a physical blow. For both of us. As if I had agreed to this. As if I had been part of the decision. The audacity was breathtaking. James continued, his voice low. "I wanted to tell you right away, but I didn't know how. I didn't want to be the one to blow up your marriage. But then I started thinking, what if you already know? What if you're okay with this?" And I realized I was making excuses. "I'm sorry, Eleanor. I should have told you sooner." I reached across the table and touched his hand. "Thank you for telling me now." James looked relieved. "What are you going to do?" I pulled out my phone. "Do you mind if I record what you just told me?" He hesitated for only a second before nodding. "If it helps, yeah." I started recording and asked him to repeat what Victor had said. When he finished, I stopped the recording and saved it to multiple cloud services. "This is important evidence." "Thank you." James leaned back. "Be careful, Eleanor. Victor doesn't handle losing well. He's going to fight this." I smiled, and it was not a kind smile. Let him try. That conversation with James was a turning point. I realized that I was not alone in seeing through Victor's facade. Other people knew, or at least suspected, that something was wrong. And that meant when the time came to reveal the truth, I would have support. I would not be written off as a scorned wife making wild accusations. I would have witnesses. I would have evidence. I would have the truth on my side. The following week, I did something that felt risky but necessary. I created an anonymous email address using a burner email service that could not be traced back to me. I crafted a message to Serena pretending to be a contributor for a blog called Professional Women Voices, which focused on women navigating career and personal life. The message was friendly and professional. I explained that I was working on a piece about young women breaking into male-dominated industries and asked if she would be willing to share her experience. I was careful to make it seem legitimate, including a fake website link that I had built specifically for this purpose, complete with stock photos and generic articles. Serena responded within a day. She was enthusiastic, flattered to be asked. We exchanged several emails. In one, I asked about her support system, whether she had a partner who helped her balance work and her personal life. Her response was everything I needed. I'm so fortunate. My boyfriend is incredibly supportive. He's actually my boss, which I know sounds complicated, but it's not. He's been separated from his wife for almost 2 years now. They're just waiting for the paperwork to finalize the divorce. She's very career-focused, and they drifted apart years ago. He said they haven't been happy in a long time, but he's so excited about our future. We're expecting twins in July, and he's already planning everything. He wants to be a great father. He's the best man I've ever met. I read that email 3 times. Each time I felt a different emotion. The first time rage, the second time sorrow, the third time clarity. Victor had lied to Serena so completely, so convincingly, that she genuinely believed she was building a future with a man who was free to love her. She had no idea she was the other woman. She had no idea that separated from his wife actually meant living with his wife and sharing a bed with her every night. She had no idea that the paperwork to finalize the divorce had never been started because there was no divorce. I screenshot the email, printed it, and added it to my file. The evidence was overwhelming now. Financial records, photos, witness testimony, Serena's own words. But I needed one more thing. I needed the perfect moment to reveal it all, and I knew exactly when that would be. Victor's father, Judge Elias Thorne, was a man who valued tradition above all else. Every year, without fail, he hosted a Father's Day celebration at the Bloomfield Hills Country Club. It was a lavish affair attended by family, friends, business associates, and members of the legal community. It was the judge's opportunity to hold court to be celebrated, to remind everyone of the legacy he had built. Victor lived for that party. It was his chance to stand beside his father and bask in the reflected glory of the Thorne family name. This year's celebration was scheduled for June 16th, and I was going to make sure it was a Father's Day no one would ever forget. In the weeks leading up to the party, I worked on my presentation. I used PowerPoint, the same software I used for client pitches, and I built it with the same attention to detail. The first slide was our wedding photo. Victor and I, young and hopeful, surrounded by flowers. The second slide was a photo Mac had taken Victor and Serena on the balcony of her apartment, his hand on her pregnant belly, both of them smiling. The contrast was stark. The third slide was a spreadsheet detailing the $138,000 in corporate funds Victor had misappropriated. I listed each expense, each date, each amount. The fourth slide was Serena's email, the one where she talked about Victor being separated and waiting for divorce papers. I highlighted the key phrases in red. The fifth slide was the audio file of James's testimony, which I had transcribed and put on screen so people could read along as they listened. And the final slide was simple. Just one sentence in large, bold letters. Some families are built on love, others are built on lies. Which one is this? I saved the presentation on a USB drive and hid it in my purse. I also saved copies on 3 different cloud services just in case. I was not taking any chances. I had spent 3 months gathering evidence, building my case, preparing for this moment. And now it was almost time. The night before Father's Day, Victor came home late. He had been out with clients, or so he said. He was in a good mood, talking about how excited he was for the party tomorrow, how proud his father would be, how this was shaping up to be a great year for Sterling Holdings. I listened and nodded and said all the right things. And then, when he went upstairs to bed, I stayed in the kitchen and poured myself a glass of wine I would not drink. I looked around at the house we had shared for 7 years, the home I had thought we were building together, and I felt nothing, no sadness, no regret, just a cold, clean certainty that tomorrow would change everything. I barely slept that night. I lay in bed next to Victor listening to him breathe, and I thought about all the nights I had lain awake wondering what was wrong with me, why I could not make him happy, what I was failing to do. I thought about the years I had spent shrinking myself, accommodating his needs, trying to be enough. And I realized that I had been asking the wrong question all along. The question was not what was wrong with me. The question was what was wrong with a man who would betray the woman who loved him, who would lie to her face every single day, who would build an entire secret life and then blame her for the emptiness he felt. As dawn broke and sunlight began to filter through the curtains, I got out of bed and went to take a shower. Today was going to be the day I stopped being invisible. I spent an hour getting ready. I pulled out the orange jumpsuit I had bought months ago but had never worn. It was bold, vibrant, the color of fire. I paired it with gold heels and gold earrings. I did my makeup carefully, strong brows, winged eyeliner, deep red lipstick. When I looked in the mirror, I barely recognized myself. I looked powerful, fierce, unbreakable. Victor knocked on the bathroom door. "You almost ready?" "The party starts at noon." I opened the door. He stopped mid-sentence, staring at me. "Wow, you look different." I smiled. "I feel different." He frowned slightly. "Is that what you're wearing?" I raised an eyebrow. "Is there a problem?" He shook his head quickly. No. You look great. Just, unexpected." I walked past him. "Good, I like unexpected." The drive to the country club was quiet. Victor seemed distracted, checking his phone every few minutes. At one point, he muttered something about needing to make a call later. I wondered if he was texting Serena, making up some excuse for why he could not see her today. I wondered if she was sitting alone in that apartment waiting for him, believing his lies. Part of me felt guilty for what was about to happen. She was going to be humiliated too, in a way. But then I remembered that the truth, no matter how painful, was better than living in a lie. And maybe, just maybe, what I was about to do would free her too. We arrived at the country club at 11:45. The party was being held in the grand ballroom, a space with high ceilings, crystal chandeliers, and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the golf course. Guests were already arriving, milling about with champagne glasses, greeting each other with the kind of polite enthusiasm that defines upper-class social events. I recognized most of them. Judge Thorne's colleagues from the bench, Victor's business partners, family members I saw once or twice a year at holidays. They all smiled at me, complimented my outfit, asked how I was doing. I smiled back and said I was wonderful, thank you for asking. No one seemed to notice that the smile never reached my eyes. Judge Thorne stood at the center of the room, holding court as always. He was 72 years old, tall and distinguished with silver hair and a presence that commanded respect. When he saw me, he broke into a wide smile. "Eleanor, my dear, you look radiant." He kissed me on both cheeks, European style, something he had picked up during a trip to France years ago. I hugged him back, and for a moment I felt a pang of regret. The judge had always been kind to me. He had welcomed me into the family without hesitation. He did not deserve what was about to happen. But then I remembered the phone call I had overheard, the one where he had yelled at Victor to confess, and I realized he had known. Maybe not everything, but enough. And he had chosen to stay silent. That made him complicit. Lunch was served at 12:30. We sat at long tables covered in white linen, eating grilled salmon and roasted vegetables while a string quartet played softly in the background. Victor sat beside me, laughing at jokes, telling stories about a recent deal he had closed. I ate mechanically, tasting nothing. My stomach was in knots, but my mind was clear. After dessert, Judge Thorne stood to give his annual Father's Day speech. He talked about the importance of family, about the values that had guided the Thorne family for generations. Integrity, honor, loyalty, truth. He spoke about how proud he was of Victor, of the man he had become, of the legacy he was building. The room applauded, Victor beamed, and I felt the cold fury inside me crystallize into something sharp and deadly. When the applause died down, I stood up. The room fell silent. Everyone turned to look at me. I could feel Victor's confusion, his surprise. Judge Thorne smiled at me expectantly. I walked to the front of the room, my heels clicking loudly in the quiet. Thank you, Judge Thorne, for those beautiful words about family and values. If I may, I'd like to add something. A small presentation, really. Just a few thoughts about honesty and integrity and what those words actually mean. The judge nodded, clearly thinking I was going to give some sort of heartfelt tribute. Of course, Eleanor. Please. I pulled the USB drive from my purse and walked to the AV table at the side of the room. The technician, a young man who had been hired to manage the music, looked at me uncertainly. I need to use the projector. He glanced at Judge Thorne, who nodded permission. The technician plugged in my USB drive. The large screen behind the podium flickered to life. Slide 1 appeared. Our wedding photo. Victor and I smiling in love, surrounded by white roses. I heard appreciative murmurs. What a beautiful photo. They look so happy. I let the image sit for a moment, then clicked to slide 2. The image changed. Now it showed Victor and Serena on the balcony of the Midtown Towers apartment, his arms around her pregnant belly, her head on his shoulder, both of them smiling. The room erupted. Gasps. A woman screamed. I heard the crash of a wine glass hitting the floor. Someone said, "What the hell?" Victor stood up, his face going white. Eleanor, what are you doing? I ignored him. I clicked to slide 3. The spreadsheet. $138,000 in corporate funds. Each line item listed. Rent for Midtown Towers apartment. Jewelry from Tiffany. Prenatal care. Dinners. A weekend getaway. All funded with company money. The murmurs turned to shouts. That's company theft. He embezzled. The judge's face had gone from confused to horrified. Victor, what is this? But I was not done. I clicked to slide 4. Serena's email filled the screen. He told me he was separated. He said the divorce was almost final. His wife only cares about her career. We're expecting twins. He's so supportive. He's the best man I've ever met. The room went completely silent. It was the kind of silence that feels heavy, suffocating. I could hear people breathing. I could hear the hum of the air conditioning. And then I clicked to slide 5. The audio began to play. James's voice, clear and damning. Victor told me Eleanor couldn't have kids, so he let Serena get pregnant for both of them, like it was some kind of solution. The room exploded. People were standing now, shouting, demanding answers. Victor was on his feet, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. Judge Thorne looked like he had aged 10 years in 10 seconds. I stood at the podium calm and composed and waited for the noise to die down. When it finally did, I spoke. My voice was steady, clear, amplified by the microphone. This is the man you call a role model. This is how he defines honesty and love. I gestured to the screen. Every piece of evidence you see here was gathered legally and ethically. No privacy violations, no illegal surveillance, just the truth. I looked directly at Victor. For 7 years, I gave you everything. My time, my energy, my devotion. I blamed myself for our problems. I thought I was failing you because I couldn't give you a child, but the truth is, I was never the problem. You were. I reached into my purse and pulled out my wedding ring. I held it up so everyone could see it, the diamond catching the light. Then I walked over to Victor's table and dropped it into his half-full champagne glass. It landed with a soft splash. My attorney will contact you regarding the divorce and equitable distribution of assets. I will also be filing a lawsuit against Sterling Holdings for corporate fund misappropriation. I tapped the champagne glass lightly with my fingernail. The sound echoed in the silent room. Happy Father's Day, Victor. I turned and walked toward the exit. Behind me, chaos erupted. Shouting, crying, accusations flying. I heard Victor's voice, desperate and angry, trying to explain, trying to defend himself. I heard Judge Thorne's voice, thunderous and furious, demanding answers. I heard the clatter of chairs, the rush of movement phones being pulled out to record the spectacle. But I did not turn around. I kept walking, my head high, my steps steady. I pushed open the doors of the country club and stepped out into the bright June sunshine. I got into my car, started the engine, and drove away. And as I pulled out of the parking lot, I felt something I had not felt in years: freedom. The fallout was immediate and spectacular. Within hours, the video of my presentation had been uploaded to social media by multiple guests. It went viral. Local news stations picked up the story. Business reporters started digging into Sterling Holdings' finances. By Monday morning, Victor's professional life was in shambles. The board of directors called an emergency meeting and demanded his resignation. An internal audit was launched revealing not just the $138,000 I had found, but additional financial irregularities totaling over $300,000. Criminal charges were filed for embezzlement and fraud. Victor's attorney tried to spin the narrative, claiming I had set him up, that the presentation was a revenge tactic, that I was bitter about the infertility. But the evidence spoke for itself. And more importantly, people started coming forward with their own stories. Business partners who had felt uncomfortable with Victor's practices. Employees who had witnessed inappropriate behavior. Even some of Judge Thorne's colleagues quietly distanced themselves from the family, not wanting to be associated with the scandal. Judge Thorne himself became a tragic figure. He held a press conference where he apologized publicly, admitting that he had known about the affair and had failed to intervene. He announced his early retirement from the bench, citing family matters and a need to reflect on his own failures. The man who had built his entire career on integrity and justice had been brought down by his own son's lies and his own cowardice in confronting them. I felt sorry for him in a way, but not sorry enough to regret what I had done. As for Serena, I learned later that she had gone into labor 2 weeks early, the stress of the revelation triggering premature birth. She had twins, a boy and a girl, both healthy. Victor was not there for the delivery. He was too busy meeting with lawyers and trying to salvage what was left of his reputation. Serena's parents came from Grand Rapids to help her, and according to Mac, who kept tabs on the situation, she filed a paternity suit against Victor, demanding child support and acknowledging that she had been deceived about the nature of their relationship. I hoped she would be okay. I hoped she would find the strength to build a new life for herself and her children, one not built on lies. My own life transformed in ways I could never have anticipated. My story resonated with thousands of women who had experienced similar betrayals, who had been made to feel like failures because they could not meet someone else's impossible expectations. I started receiving messages daily. Some were from women asking for advice. Others were from women simply thanking me for giving them the courage to leave their own toxic situations. I realized that my story was bigger than just my marriage. It was about the way women are conditioned to shrink themselves, to accept less, to blame themselves when relationships fail. And I decided I could not stay silent. I started a podcast called The Truth Will Free You. Each episode featured a different woman's story of reclaiming her power after betrayal. We talked about the red flags they had ignored, the lies they had believed the moment they decided enough was enough. We talked about the legal process of divorce, about protecting assets, about co-parenting with toxic ex-partners. We talked about therapy, about grief, about the long, messy process of healing. The podcast grew quickly, reaching tens of thousands of listeners within the first 3 months. I was invited to speak at women's conferences, to write articles for major publications, to appear on morning talk shows. I became somewhat unexpectedly a voice for women's empowerment and self-advocacy. But beyond the public's response, there were personal changes, too. I started therapy with a psychologist who specialized in trauma and betrayal. Dr. Sarah Reeves helped me understand that my inability to conceive had been weaponized against me, used as a tool to make me feel less than. She helped me see that my worth was not tied to my fertility or my ability to meet someone else's expectations. She helped me grieve not just the loss of my marriage, but the loss of the person I had been before the Eleanor who had made herself small and quiet and accommodating. And slowly, week by week, session by session, I began to heal. I also reconnected with friends I had neglected during my marriage. My college roommate Melissa flew in from Boston to spend a weekend with me. We drank wine, ate too much pizza, and talked until 3 in the morning like we used to. She told me she had been worried about me for years, that she had noticed how I had changed after marrying Victor, how I had stopped being myself. "I'm so glad you're back," she said, hugging me tight. I realized that I had not just lost myself in my marriage, I had lost community connection joy, and now I was reclaiming all of it. 3 months after Father's Day, I did something I had been both anticipating and dreading. I went to see Serena. I had her address from Mac's initial report, and I knew she was still living at Midtown Towers with her babies. I texted her first, explaining who I was and asking if she would be willing to meet. I expected her to refuse to tell me to go to hell to never contact her again. But she agreed. We met at a small park near her apartment. She was sitting on a bench, a double stroller beside her. The twins were asleep, tiny bundles wrapped in blue and pink blankets. Serena looked exhausted. There were dark circles under her eyes, and her hair was pulled back in a messy bun. When she saw me, she stood her expression wary. "Eleanor." I nodded. "Serena. Thank you for meeting me." She sat back down, and I sat beside her, leaving space between us. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then she said, "I don't know what you want me to say." "I'm sorry. I'm sorry." I believed him. "I'm sorry. I ruined your marriage." I looked at her, really looked at her, and I saw someone who had been just as manipulated as I had been. "You didn't ruin my marriage. He did. He lied to both of us." She looked down at her hands. "I know. I've had a lot of time to think about it. About how stupid I was, how naive. I should have asked more questions. I should have demanded to meet you to see proof that he was actually separated. I should have known something was wrong." I shook my head. "He's a good liar. That's not your fault." She laughed bitterly. "Good liar. That's one way to put it." She gestured to the twins. "These are his kids, and he's never even met them, never called, never texted. The court ordered child support, but that's it. No relationship, no interest, like they don't even exist." I felt a wave of sadness. Not for Victor, but for those two innocent babies who would grow up knowing their father had abandoned them before they were even born. I reached into my purse and pulled out an envelope. I had prepared this beforehand, not sure if I would actually give it to her, but deciding in the moment that I would. "This is the contact information for a lawyer who specializes in family law. She helped me through my divorce, and she's good. Really good. If you ever need help navigating custody or support issues, call her. I've already spoken to her about you. The first consultation is covered." Serena took the envelope, her eyes welling with tears. "Why are you helping me?" I stood up. "Because we both deserved better, and because I don't want you to go through this alone." She wiped her eyes. "Thank you." I hesitated, then said, "I need you to know something. I exposed him not to hurt you. I did it because I needed the truth to come out. I needed people to see who he really was. And I needed to stop feeling like I was crazy, like I was the problem." Serena nodded. "I understand. And honestly, even though it was humiliating, I'm glad you did it. Because now I know. Now I can move forward without wondering if he really loved me, if he was really going to leave you, if we were really building a future. Now I know it was all a lie. And that's better than spending years waiting for something that was never going to happen." We looked at each other, two women who had been betrayed by the same man, and something passed between us. Not friendship exactly, but understanding, solidarity. The recognition that we were both survivors. I reached out and squeezed her hand. "You're going to be okay." She squeezed back. "So are you." As I walked away from that park, I felt lighter. I had been carrying so much anger towards Serena, so much misplaced blame. But seeing her there with those babies exhausted and alone, I realized she had lost just as much as I had, maybe more. She had lost her job when the scandal broke. She had lost the man she thought loved her. She had lost the future she had imagined. And now she was a single mother of twins with no support system and a mountain of challenges ahead. My life was hard, but hers was harder. And in that moment, I chose compassion over bitterness. The divorce was finalized in October, 6 months after Father's Day. Michigan law required a waiting period, and Victor's attorneys tried to drag out the proceedings, hoping I would settle for less. But I had hired the best divorce attorney in Detroit, a woman named Patricia Huang, who was known for her ruthless efficiency and her refusal to back down. Patricia argued that the house had been purchased with my inheritance and should remain my separate property. She argued that Victor's embezzlement and fraud had compromised marital assets and that I was entitled to more than half to compensate for his criminal behavior. She argued that I deserved spousal support, given that I had supported his career for 7 years while sacrificing my own advancement. In the end, I got the house 70% of our liquid assets and a substantial monthly payment until I remarried, or for 10 years, whichever came first. Victor was left with very little. His legal fees alone had consumed most of his remaining assets. He moved into a small apartment in a less desirable part of the city. Last I heard, he was working as a mid-level manager at a regional real estate firm, a far cry from the CEO position he had once held. As for me, my career flourished. Lexus promoted me to regional director overseeing sales operations across the Midwest. My income doubled. I bought a new car, a sleek Lexus RX 350 in midnight blue, and I loved driving it. Loved the way it handled, loved what it represented. Success on my own terms. I redecorated the house, getting rid of every piece of furniture that reminded me of Victor. I painted the walls soft blues and greens. I filled the space with plants and art and books. I adopted a second dog, a scrappy little terrier mix I named Phoenix. Cooper and Phoenix became instant best friends, and watching them play in the backyard filled me with a joy I had not felt in years. I also started a weekly gathering at Maple and Steam called The Truth Table. Every Thursday evening, women would come to share their stories. Some were in the early stages of realizing their relationships were toxic. Others were years into healing. We talked about boundaries, self-worth, financial independence, and the messy, complicated process of rebuilding a life. My elderly neighbor Helen started coming and bringing homemade apple pies, a symbol of returning to real, authentic living. Those Thursday evenings became sacred to me. They reminded me that my pain had led me to something bigger than myself, that by sharing my story, I had created space for others to share theirs, that we were not alone. On a Saturday morning in late September, almost a year after that terrible Tuesday when my world had fallen apart, I decided to drive out to Belle Isle. It was a place I had always loved, a small island park in the Detroit River with beautiful views and quiet walking paths. I brought Cooper and Phoenix with me. We walked along the water, the dogs racing ahead and then circling back to check on me. I found a bench overlooking the river and sat down. The sun was shining. The water was calm. The breeze was cool and refreshing. I pulled out my phone and took a photo of the view. Then I opened my social media app and posted the photo with a caption. A year ago, I thought my life was over because I couldn't be what someone else wanted me to be. Today, I realize my life is just beginning because I finally decided to be what I needed me to be. Within hours, the post had thousands of likes and hundreds of comments. But more than the public response, it felt true. For the first time in a long time, I felt at peace. That afternoon, I drove home and parked in the driveway. I sat in the car for a moment, looking at the house that was now entirely mine. The flowers I had planted were blooming. The porch light was on. This was not the life I had imagined when I walked down the aisle all those years ago. But it was a good life. A life I had fought for. A life I had earned. I got out of the car, let the dogs out, and walked up the front steps. As I unlocked the door, I thought about all the women who had reached out to me who had found the courage to leave, to speak up, to reclaim their power. I thought about Serena and her twins building a new life despite everything. I thought about Judge Thorne, who had lost his legacy, but perhaps gained some humility. I thought about Victor alone in his small apartment, finally facing the consequences of his choices. And I thought about myself, the woman I had become. Scarred, but stronger. Broken, but rebuilt. Free. Some women burn bridges. Others build new cities. I had done both. I had burned the bridge that led back to a life where I was invisible, where I was valued only for what I could provide, where my pain was dismissed and my worth was questioned. And I had built something new. A community. A purpose. A life that was wholly, unapologetically mine. So here is what I want to ask you. Have you ever felt invisible in your own life? Have you ever been told that your worth is determined by what you can give to someone else rather than who you are as a person? Have you ever stayed silent because you were afraid that speaking up would cost you everything? If the answer is yes, then I want you to know this. The truth will not destroy you. It will set you free. And on the other side of that truth, you will find a version of yourself that is stronger, braver, and more whole than you ever imagined possible. If this story spoke to you, If it made you feel less alone, then please like this video, subscribe to this channel, and leave a comment below sharing your thoughts. What would you have done in my situation? Have you ever had to choose between silence and truth? Your voice matters, and together we can make sure no one has to suffer in silence ever again.